The room echoed with metallic clanks as the human was unceremoniously dragged into the alien detention facility, his feet barely skimming the ground. He craned his neck to look up at his captor, a hulking, 7-foot-tall alien woman with violet-hued skin, glinting golden eyes, and a perpetual smirk that could incite riots. Her species was infamous for their physical dominance, and knack for lording it over the lesser beings of the galaxy. "So," she began, her voice dripping with mockery, "this is the mighty human everyone's been whispering about. I expected more mass. Do they shrink you for easier storage, or is this your final form?" The human sighed, straightening himself the moment her grip loosened. "They didn't tell me I'd be a sideshow attraction. Should I juggle something for your entertainment, or is standing here enough to blow your mind?" Her laugh was a low, resonant rumble. "Oh, I like this one. Mouthy. That's cute, makes up for your, other shortcomings." Her eyes dipped meaningfully, and her smirk widened. "Ah," he replied dryly. "The classics. Because you're clearly compensating for nothing." Her eyebrow twitched. "Watch it, little man. I could crush you like a ration packet. Yet here I am uncrushed. Let me guess, crushing isn't as fun when the other person's enjoying it?" She blinked, caught off guard for a moment, before chuckling. "You've got guts. Pity they're packed into such a small package. This will be fun." The next hour passed in a whirlwind of indignities, all carefully curated to maximize her amusement. She assigned him the most absurd tasks, polishing a control panel he could barely reach without jumping, carrying crates filled with tools clearly designed for hands twice his size, and recalibrating a console that required him to stand on a precarious stack of alien supply boxes. "Careful up there," she called mockingly from the other side of the room, lounging against the wall. "Wouldn't want you to fall and splatter your delicate human innards everywhere." He glanced over his shoulder, balanced on his toes. "Worried about me already? How touching." Her grin widened. "Worried? Hardly. Just don't want to clean up the mess. It'd take a scrubber the size of your ego." The human muttered something under his breath as he stretched to reach the final adjustment. "What was that?" "Oh, nothing. Just wondering if you'd get paid by the insult, or if this is a passion project." She pushed off the wall and sauntered over, her towering presence making the already small space feel claustrophobic. "You don't scare easily, do you? Not by oversized bullies with questionable sense of humor, no." She leaned in, her face just inches from his. Her golden eyes gleamed with amusement, but there was an edge of menace beneath it. "I could make you very uncomfortable, human. You should be grateful I find you amusing. Amusing enough to keep around, or just long enough to finish the chores you can't be bothered to do," he quipped, stepping down from the makeshift ladder and brushing imaginary dust from his hands. Her laugh startled him. It was genuine, deep, and almost infectious. "I'll give you credit, little guy. You've got a backbone. Pity it's so small." He smirked. "Small but sturdy. That's more than I can say for your sense of humor." Her expression froze for a split second before she burst out laughing again. "Oh, you're going to be a fun toy to break." The human didn't flinch. Instead, he met her gaze with a raised brow. "I hope you're not putting too much faith in your breaking skills. Would hate to see you disappointed." The tension shifted, becoming something subtler, more layered. For the first time, her smirk faltered ever so slightly, replaced by an expression he couldn't quite decipher. "I think I'll enjoy testing that theory," she said finally, her voice softer but no less teasing. "Good," he replied, stepping around her to grab another tool. "Because I'm just getting started." As he walked away, he could feel her eyes on his back. Her laughter followed him, echoing in the otherwise silent chamber. The alien guard leaned against the console, watching him struggle with an alien device clearly not designed for human hands. Her grin was as infuriating as ever. "Careful now, little man. That thing might weigh more than your entire species' combined muscle mass." He didn't bother looking up, focusing instead on the tangle of wires he was attempting to decipher. "I'm starting to think you talk this much to distract yourself from how bad you are at your job." She straightened slightly, her tone mock-offended. Excuse me? This bad at her job guard has kept you alive, hasn't she? Barely. I don't think babysitting counts as a resume builder for you, though. Her laugh echoed, low and throaty. You're bold for someone who couldn't outrun a limping Glork beast. But I'll let you have your little moment of defiance. It's cute. He snorted, pulling at a stubborn cable. If you're trying to undermine my self-esteem, you're going to have to do better than recycled playground insults. She watched him for a moment, her smirk unwavering. Then, with deliberate slowness, she walked over and leaned down, looming just above him. You know, she said, her voice soft but tinged with amusement. My species has a saying, small creatures make the best snacks. He glanced up, unimpressed. We have a saying too, bullies bark louder when they're insecure. Her golden eyes narrowed, though not in anger. If anything, she seemed intrigued. Are you always this mouthy, or is it just me bringing out your inner idiot? Maybe I just have a thing for humbling people who think size equals superiority. He shot back, finally yanking the cable free and holding it up triumphantly. She clapped slowly, the sound exaggerated and dripping with mockery. Bravo, human! You've proven yourself capable of unplugging something. A true marvel of engineering genius. Thanks for the applause, he said, shoving the cable into the corresponding port. I was starting to think your hands were only good for pointing out problems you're too lazy to fix. Her grin widened, but there was a flicker of something else in her expression, respect, perhaps, though she'd never admit it. You know, you're the first human I've met who doesn't immediately cower in front of me. It's almost refreshing. He raised an eyebrow, brushing his hands together as he finished his task. If that's your way of complimenting me, it could use some work. Oh, it's not a compliment, she replied, her tone sharp but playful. Just an observation. One I'll probably regret later when I have to scrape your remains off the floor. You're awfully confident for someone who's been outsmarted by someone half her size. She blinked, caught off guard. Outsmarted? By you? Don't make me laugh. He gestured to the now functioning console, which had been dead when she first brought him to the room. Right, because clearly, you had this under control before I got here. Her gaze flicked to the console, and for a brief moment, she looked genuinely annoyed. Then, to his surprise, she chuckled. All right, fine. You've got some skills. I'll admit it, grudgingly. Wow, he said, mock-gasping. Was that almost a compliment? Somebody write this down. Don't push your luck, Tiny, she warned, though her tone lacked the usual bite. He leaned casually against the console, a smirk tugging at his lips. Oh, I wouldn't dream of it. Wouldn't want to bruise your delicate ego. Her laugh this time was louder, almost genuine. You're impossible. And yet here I am, doing the impossible every day. She shook her head, clearly amused despite herself. All right, human. You've earned yourself another day of not being squashed. Don't let it go to your head. As long as you don't let your frustration go to yours, he replied, turning back to his work. She watched him for a moment longer, her usual teasing grin replaced by something softer, though she quickly masked it. Careful, little man. You might just make me like you. He glanced back, smirking. And we couldn't have that, could we? No, she said, her tone light but with an edge of seriousness. We couldn't. For the first time, the banter felt less like a game and more like the beginning of something unexpected. Neither of them acknowledged it, but it lingered in the air as she turned and walked away, her laughter still echoing faintly behind her. The next day began with her usual smirk and a cutting remark. Still here, I see. Guess I didn't squash you in my sleep. Shame, really. Would have saved me the trouble. He shot her a look, his hands busy tinkering with another alien gadget. You talk about squashing a lot for someone who hasn't actually done it. Is that like your go-to threat, or are you just compensating for a lack of follow-through? Her golden eyes narrowed, though the corners of her mouth twitched upward. You're lucky I find your insolence amusing. Otherwise, you'd be a smear on this floor already. Amusing, huh? He said, not bothering to hide his grin. Good to know I'm keeping the morale high. She stepped closer, towering over him as usual, and crossed her arms. I wonder how long you can keep that sharp tongue of yours before it gets you into trouble. My species has patience, but it's not limitless. And yet here you are, he said, standing up to face her despite the comical height difference. Still putting up with me. Either you enjoy this little back and forth, or you're afraid to admit that I'm growing on you. Her laugh was short and sharp. Don't flatter yourself, human. I've met weeds that were harder to get rid of. Must be tough for someone so tall to be this bad at pulling weeds. She opened her mouth to retort but stopped, visibly caught off guard by his quick wit. For a moment she simply stared at him, her golden eyes scanning his face like she was trying to figure out a puzzle. You really don't know when to quit, do you? She finally said, her tone softer but no less teasing. He shrugged. Quitting's for people who don't think they can win. And I don't lose. Oh, is that so? She replied, arching a brow. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been losing since the moment you got here. Depends on how you measure winning, he said with a smirk. I've managed to keep you entertained, haven't I? That's got to count for something. Her expression shifted again, and for the first time, the teasing edge in her voice was replaced by something resembling genuine curiosity. You're different from the others, you know that? Most humans would have been begging for mercy by now, but you're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. I haven't decided which. Maybe a little of both, he admitted, leaning casually against the wall. Or maybe I just don't see the point in being scared of someone who clearly isn't as intimidating as she thinks she is. Her eyes widened slightly, and for a split second, he thought she might actually be offended. But then she laughed, a deep, resonant sound that filled the room and took him by surprise. You've got nerve, I'll give you that, she said, shaking her head. It's almost impressive. Almost? He echoed, pretending to be wounded. Now I'm disappointed. She smirked, leaning down so her face was level with his. Careful, little man. Keep pushing, and I might actually start to like you. That's the goal, he replied without missing a beat. Her laugh echoed again, but this time it was different, softer, less mocking. She straightened up and stepped back, her expression unreadable. You're a strange one, human, she said after a moment. I'm not sure if I should respect you or throw you out the nearest airlock. Why not both? He suggested. She shook her head, a hint of a smile still lingering on her lips. You're impossible. And yet here I am, he said, gesturing to himself. Living proof that the impossible is possible. She didn't reply immediately, instead watching him with a look that bordered on admiration. It was fleeting, gone almost as quickly as it appeared, but he caught it. Get back to work, she said finally, her tone gruff but lacking its usual bite. He grinned, turning back to the gadget he'd been working on. Yes, ma'am. Wouldn't want to disappoint you. As he worked, he couldn't help but notice that her teasing remarks had grown less frequent, replaced by something subtler, almost playful. And for the first time since his capture, he began to think that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to win her over. The sound of alarms blared through the facility, an obnoxious symphony of chaos. He barely had time to register what was happening before she stormed into the room, her expression a mix of annoyance and urgency. Looks like your species' knack for causing problems isn't limited to your size, she barked, pulling up a holographic display. I didn't touch anything. He shot back, raising his hands. You think I'd sabotage a place I'm stuck in? Her golden eyes flashed as she scanned the display. Systems overheating. The reactor's about to blow. Great, he muttered, already moving toward the nearest console. Guess that's my cue to save the day. Again. She stared at him for a moment before stepping aside. You're awfully confident for someone who might be vaporized in the next 10 minutes. Confidence is all I've got at this point, he said, diving into the control panel. His fingers worked quickly, deciphering the alien interface with an ease that surprised even him. She stood behind him, arms crossed, her towering presence almost suffocating. You sure you know what you're doing, little man? Nope, he replied without looking up. But I'm guessing it's more than you do. Her laughter came despite the dire situation. Fair point. Just don't blow us up faster, all right? He ignored her, focusing on the task at hand. The controls were a mess of symbols and commands that made no sense to him, but he trusted his instincts, piecing together a solution one step at a time. You're surprisingly quiet, he said after a moment. Not like you to let me work in peace. I'm just wondering how someone so small can act like he's carrying the weight of the galaxy, she replied, her tone unusually soft. Maybe because I am, he quipped, sparing her a quick glance. And maybe because someone has to, seeing as you're just standing there looking pretty. Her eyebrows shot up. Pretty? Distracting then, he corrected, smirking. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Her laugh was sharp but genuine. Focus, human. If you save the day, I'll let that one slide. Noted, he said, returning to the console. A few tense minutes passed as he worked, sweat beading on his forehead. The alarms were deafening, and the vibrations from the reactor core beneath them were growing stronger. Finally, he slammed a hand on the console, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. Got it! The alarm stopped, replaced by the faint hum of a stabilized reactor. He turned to face her, his arms spread wide. You're welcome. She stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, to his surprise, she clapped, slow, deliberate, and sarcastic. Congratulations, human. You've officially outlived your uselessness. He rolled his eyes. I'll take that as a thank you. She stepped closer, towering over him as always. But this time, there was no mocking edge to her smirk. Instead, there was something warmer, almost proud. You're not completely useless, she admitted, her tone lighter than usual. High praise, he replied, crossing his arms. Careful, or I might start thinking you actually like having me around. Don't push it, she said, though her smirk didn't fade. You might have saved the day, but that doesn't mean I won't squash you if you get too cocky. Right, because that's worked so well for you so far, he shot back. Her laughter filled the room, a sound that had become strangely familiar to him. You're impossible, human. But I'll give you this, you've got guts. More than I expected. Guess I'm full of surprises, he said, leaning casually against the console. She studied him for a moment, her golden eyes softer than he'd ever seen them. Maybe you are, she said quietly. The silence that followed was almost comfortable, a stark contrast to the chaos of moments before. He didn't know what to make of the shift, but he wasn't about to question it. Don't think this means I'm going to go easy on you, she said finally, breaking the silence. You're still insufferable. And you're still intimidating, he replied, grinning. But I think we're starting to grow on each other. Careful, little man, she warned, though her tone lacked its usual bite. I might actually start to tolerate you. That's the dream, he said, turning back to the console. As she watched him work, she couldn't help but smile, a real one this time. Maybe the human wasn't so small after all.